April 17th, present day. Portland, Oregon, United States. The only sound in the cavernous silence of courtroom 4B is the confident, clear voice of an 18-year-old boy. He stands at the defendant's podium, hands resting lightly on the polished wood. He's wearing a sweater vest, of all things. Looks like he's about to give a valedictorian speech, not face a sentence for murder. And he's not pleading for mercy. He's explaining. "The prosecution told you a story," Liam Thorne says, a faint, patient smile on his lips, as if he's tutoring a slow student. "A story about a monster. A cold, calculating killer." He pauses, lets his eyes sweep over the jury, the packed gallery, the grieving family of the woman he killed. "But look at the evidence they actually gave you. Look at me." He gestures to himself, this picture of youthful promise. "You wanted a monster, but all you found was a straight-A student from a good family. A debate champion. An MIT admit." His voice drops, feigning a somber weight. "My sincere condolences to the Reed family. Truly. But your tragedy isn't my fault. You're confusing coincidence with culpability. You're chasing a ghost, and you've shackled a future instead." The air in the room is so thick with tension you could choke on it. His parents, in the front row, look pale but proud. His lawyer has a stiff, frozen expression. And the judge, Judge Aaron Blackwell, isn't writing. He's not shuffling papers. He's just watching Liam. His eyes are like two chips of flint. And in that moment, you can see it on Liam's face. He thinks he's won. He thinks his performance, this final, brilliant soliloquy, has sealed it. He believes, with every arrogant fiber of his being, that he is about to walk out of this room a free man. He is wrong. This is the story of how a brilliant, privileged teenager believed he committed the perfect crime. How he manipulated, lied, and danced on the grave of his victim for over a year. And it's the story of the one speech he never should have given. The boast that turned his future from a dorm room at MIT to a concrete cell he will never, ever leave. I want to ask you to do two quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Because to understand the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of that moment in the courtroom, we have to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the night the real ghost was made. 14 months earlier. October. Portland. The rain in Portland isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a constant, cold mist that seeps into everything. It makes the city smell like wet pine and damp concrete. On this particular October night, it was coming down in a steady, whispering drizzle. Evelyn Reed sent her last text message at 6:47 p.m. It was to her roommate, Maya, running late. "The data thing was bigger than I thought. Don't wait up." Then, she logged out of her workstation at Thorne Biotech at 7:03 p.m. The security camera on the third floor shows her pulling on a dark green raincoat, shouldering her laptop bag, and heading for the stairwell. She pauses once, looks back down the empty hallway, not with fear exactly, but with a kind of focused concern. A deep thinker, checking her work. Then, she's gone. She never made it to her car. At 11 p.m., Maya called the police. By midnight, a young, sharp detective named Mara Cruz was standing in Evelyn's orderly apartment, looking at a life laid bare in spreadsheets, philosophy books, and a thriving succulent collection. Evelyn was 22. An intern. A data whiz. Quiet. Reliable. She wouldn't just vanish, Maya said, her voice cracking. She had a presentation tomorrow. She was meticulous. Detective Cruz nodded, already feeling that familiar, cold knot in her gut. The meticulous ones don't vanish. Not without a reason. The first, obvious lead was the workplace. Thorne Biotech was a gleaming pillar of the local tech scene. And when Cruz started asking about the data thing Evelyn mentioned, she kept hearing a name, whispered with a mix of respect and caution. Liam Thorne. The founder's son. 17 years old. The initial interview was held in the Thornes' breathtaking modern home in the West Hills, all glass and steel and views of the fog-shrouded city below. Liam didn't look like a suspect. He looked like a poster child. Clean-cut, polite, with an unervingly calm intelligence in his eyes. His father's lawyer sat silently beside him, a human shield in a tailored suit. "Evelyn," Liam said, his brow furrowing with what looked like genuine puzzlement. "Sure, I knew who she was. She worked in data analytics. Seemed quiet. I hope she's okay." He offered an alibi that was, on paper, perfect. Study group at the library until 8, confirmed by 3 upstanding classmates. Home by 8:30, confirmed by his mother. His phone location data pinged along that exact route. Detective Cruz asked all the standard questions. He answered with a smooth, rehearsed clarity. But it was the way he answered. He'd often rephrase her questions, as if making sure she understood them. He'd reference logical fallacies. When she pushed on a minor inconsistency, he didn't get flustered. He gave a slight, patient smile. "Detective," he said, near the end, his tone gently condescending. "I understand you have a job to do, but I have a physics midterm tomorrow, and an early decision application due for MIT. My future, it's kind of on the line here. So if we could focus on finding Evelyn, and not on some theoretical drama, I'd really appreciate it." He wasn't defensive. He was dismissive. He treated the disappearance of a human being, and the suspicion aimed at him, as a trivial inconvenience. A glitch in his otherwise perfect schedule. As Detective Cruz drove back down the winding hillside road, the rain smearing her windshield, the knot in her gut tightened. The alibi was solid. The boy was pristine. Everything said to let it go. But she'd seen his eyes. Cool, assessing, utterly devoid of the anxiety a normal teenager would have radiating from them in a murder investigation. He wasn't scared of her. He was curious, like she was a specimen. She knew, right then and there. She was looking at the person who made Evelyn Reed a ghost. The only problem was, she had absolutely no idea how to prove it. And Liam Thorne, sitting in his glass-walled house, watching the police cruiser's taillights disappear into the mist, knew it, too. He was already thinking about his future. A future he believed was untouchable. But even the most perfect crime has a fingerprint. A single, invisible flaw. And Liam's wasn't in the evidence he left behind. It was in his mind. It was the unshakable belief that he was smarter than everyone else in the room. Even the judge. Let's leave Liam up there in his glass house for a moment. Let's go where the real story was beginning to whisper. Not in the world of polished statements and lawyer-approved alibis, but in the cold, silent, digital world Evelyn Reed lived in. Because when a meticulous person vanishes, they don't leave a messy room. They leave a trail. Detective Mara Cruz sat in the stark, fluorescent-lit cave of the Digital Forensics Lab, 2 days after Evelyn disappeared. The hum of servers was the only sound. On the screen in front of her wasn't a crime scene photo, but a mirror of Evelyn's laptop. It was so ordered. Files nested in folders with clinical precision. Budget spreadsheets. Academic papers on ethical data models. Playlists titled Focus Flow. This wasn't just a computer. It was a portrait of a mind that hated chaos. Check the recent cloud backups, the forensics tech, a guy named Ben with tired eyes and 3 energy drinks on his desk, said. Especially the work-related syncs. She was a rules follower. If she found something wrong at work, she'd document it. Probably even draft the report before she sent it. Cruz scrolled. And there, in a folder marked TBI_admin, she found it. Not the report. Something more telling. A series of encrypted note files, time-stamped over the previous week. The subject line made Cruz's spine go straight. Anomaly, Project Hermes Ledger. Ben decrypted them. The words that filled the screen were dry, technical, and devastating. October 12th. Cross-referenced server logs for Hermes. Found recurrent, unauthorized after-hours access from internal ID Elthorn_admin. This is the founder's son's legacy access key. Traffic patterns don't match any approved research pathways. Flagged. October 14th. Isolated queried data. L. Thorne_admin is pulling raw, anonymized patient biomarker data and running it through a secondary, non-secure proxy server. This is a major HIPAA and ethics violation. Purpose unclear. October 15th. Traced proxy server destination. It's not for research. It's a filter. The data is being used to validate and score entries on an external, blockchain-based ledger. This is a cryptocurrency scheme. Using private patient data to launder money or mine credibility. Need to confirm. The final entry, from the day she vanished, was shortest. October 16th. Confirmed. It's a wash trading scam. Using our data to give fake weight to a worthless crypto asset. Sophisticated. Premeditated. Tried to raise with Mr. Thorne Sr. today. He was in a meeting. Will file formal internal report tomorrow a.m. This is big. Cruz leaned back, the hum of the servers suddenly sounding like a roar. This was it. The motive. Evelyn hadn't stumbled onto an affair or a petty theft. She'd found a brilliant, complex financial crime running on her company's own hardware. And the architect was a 17-year-old boy with a key to the castle. He wasn't just stealing, Cruz murmured, more to herself than to Ben. He was using the company's own reputation, built on real science, to pump up a fake digital currency. He was turning ethics into electricity for a money machine. Ben whistled low. A kid running that? That's cold. But where was the proof? The report was never filed. The L. Thorne_admin access logs on the main server had been meticulously scrubbed the night Evelyn disappeared. Liam had covered his tracks there. He was smart. So Cruz followed Evelyn's last physical steps. The security footage from the Thorne Biotech parking garage showed her green raincoat getting into her little sedan at 7:18 p.m. She drove out, turning not toward home, but toward the industrial area lining the Willamette River. The last camera to catch her was a city traffic cam at the intersection of NW Front and Hoyt. 7:26 p.m. Her turn signal blinked, pointing her toward the old shipping warehouses and silent docks. Then, she vanished from the electronic eye. Cruz drove there herself that night. The rain had returned, that same fine Portland mist. It coated the cracked concrete of the abandoned loading bays, muffled the distant sound of the city. The river slid by, black and oily, smelling of wet rust and stagnant water. She stood there, under a flickering lone security light that buzzed like an angry insect. This is where the digital ghost became a real one. Evelyn had come here for a reason. A meeting? A confrontation? She'd had the evidence on her laptop, which was also gone. Cruz looked at the dark water, at the rotting wooden pilings. The perfect place to make something, or someone, disappear forever. The forensics team would comb the area, but the river was a hungry, silent partner. It gave up nothing easily. Back in her car, the heater blasting, Cruz felt the weight of two truths. First, Evelyn Reed was almost certainly dead, her body given to the cold, deep river. Second, Liam Thorne was a different kind of animal than she'd ever hunted. Not a hot-blooded killer, but a cold-blooded CEO of his own crime. He didn't see a person in his way. He saw a data leak, and he had deleted it. But as she drove away from the whispering river, one question burned. He'd cleaned the server. He'd planned the alibi. He'd chosen the perfect spot. Had he really been perfect? Or had Evelyn, the meticulous ghost in the server, left one final flag in the data that he'd missed? So, we have a victim. We have a motive. Detective Cruz had the why. But in the real world, especially in a world of money and influence, why isn't enough. You need how. You need proof that can survive in a courtroom. And standing between Cruz and that proof was a force field made of polished oak, expensive wool, and a last name that opened doors. The Thorne family. 2 weeks after Evelyn vanished, the investigation was ice-cold in the public eye. No body. No murder weapon. Just a missing intern and a mountain of digital suspicion that a good defense attorney would call circumstantial fantasy. Cruz needed to apply pressure. The only way to do that was to go back to the source. to look Liam Thorne in the eye again. This time, it wasn't a polite chat in his home. It was a formal, scheduled interview at the police station. He came with both parents and the family's lawyer, a man named Arthur Cade whose suit probably cost more than Cruz's car. They moved through the precinct like a royal delegation passing through a peasant village, polite, detached, utterly protected. Liam sat in the interview room, but he didn't look like he was in an interview room. He looked like he was waiting for a slightly delayed college interview. He was reading a paperback, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and didn't put it down until Cruz and her partner took their seats. "Liam," Cruz began, keeping her voice neutral. "Thanks for coming in. We're following up on some inconsistencies in the server logs from your father's company. From the night Evelyn Reed disappeared." Arthur Cade held up a single, manicured finger. "Detective, my client is here voluntarily, as a courtesy. He has already provided his account. We've been over this." Liam, however, gave a small, dismissive wave to his lawyer. "It's fine, Mr. Cade." He turned his calm, intelligent gaze to Cruz. He looked interested. "Inconsistencies? That seems unlikely. The system logs are automatic. What specifically are you referring to?" Cruz laid out a simplified version of what they'd found: the unauthorized access, the proxy server, the scrambled data trails that ended when Evelyn did. Liam listened, nodding slightly, as if she were explaining a mildly challenging math problem. When she finished, he steepled his fingers. "I see the confusion," he said, his voice patient. "The Elthorn_admin key. It's a legacy administrative token. It's on a network keychain with a dozen other old access points. It hasn't been used by me in over a year. My father can confirm I have my own limited access profile." He leaned forward slightly. "What you're describing, this wash trading scheme, it sounds complex. It would require a deep understanding of both blockchain protocols and our proprietary data structures. You're suggesting a high school senior, with a full academic and extracurricular load, designed and ran this, in secret, without any of our IT security team noticing." He paused, letting the absurdity hang in the air. Then he delivered the masterstroke. "If such a scheme existed," Liam continued, "wouldn't the logical suspect be a disgruntled IT employee? Or an external hacker who compromised that old key? The fact that you focus solely on me, despite my verified alibi, feels emotional. Not logical." He'd done it again. He hadn't defended himself. He'd reframed the entire investigation as a clumsy, personal attack. He made the detectives look small. Cruz pushed. "Where were you again, between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. on the 16th? "The library. Then home. As previously stated." "And you didn't see Evelyn Reed? She didn't contact you about any concerns?" A flicker of something, not guilt, but impatience, crossed his face. "Detective Cruz, if every employee with a concern requested a personal meeting with the founder's son after hours by the river, I'd never get my homework done. It's a tragic coincidence that her last location is near a place I pass. But the city is full of tragic coincidences." The interview circled for another 20 minutes. Liam never raised his voice. He never contradicted himself. He used phrases like, "it stands to reason," and "by deductive logic." He wasn't talking to cops. He was giving a tutorial. Finally, Arthur Cade looked at his watch. "We're done here. Unless you're charging my client with something, we're leaving." They had nothing to charge him with. Nothing but a feeling. As the Thorns gathered their things, Liam paused at the door. He looked back at Cruz, and for a second, the polite mask slipped. Not into anger, but into a look of pure, analytical curiosity. Like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You know," he said, his voice almost friendly, "the probability of you finding any physical evidence after all this time, with all this rain, it's statistically negligible. You're chasing the past. I'd focus on the future, if I were you. Somebody out there might actually be a danger to people." Then he was gone, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and the echo of absolute certainty in the stale interview room air. Cruz's partner slammed his notebook shut. Kid's a robot. A smug, untouchable robot. But Cruz just stared at the empty doorway. He was wrong. Liam Thorne wasn't a robot. Robots follow logic without ego. What she had just seen was a profound, terrifying arrogance. He wasn't hiding from the truth. He genuinely believed he was above it. That the rules of evidence, of consequence, were for other, lesser people. And that, she knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because arrogant people, people who believe they're perfect, they never look for their own mistakes. They just assume they didn't make any. To understand what happened on those dark docks, you have to get inside Liam Thorne's head. And trust me, it's a cold, quiet, and meticulously organized place. Let's rewind to the day Evelyn Reed discovered his little project. He'd been monitoring the server logs. Of course he had. He saw her user ID poking around in the hidden directories, accessing the proxy gateways he'd built. He watched, in real time, as the digital tripwires he'd set were quietly triggered. He didn't panic. Panic is for people who aren't in control. He felt irritated. A sharp, intellectual frustration, like when you've built an elegant model and someone introduces a clumsy variable. Evelyn wasn't a person to him in that moment. She was a system error. A bug in his code. He intercepted the email she tried to send to his father's private address. It was simple. He had admin privileges she couldn't even conceive of. He read her careful, precise draft report. It was all there. Every step of his operation, laid out with clinical accuracy. He felt a flicker of something then, not admiration, but recognition. She's good, he thought, for a normal person. But normal people were governed by ethics, by conscience, by fear. Liam was governed by logic. And the logical solution was clear: the report could not be filed. The variable had to be neutralized. He sent her a message from a masked account, posing as a senior compliance officer. Urgent. Need to discuss your findings in person before formal filing. Discretion required. Tonight, 7:45 p.m., Dock 7, Old Shipping Warehouses. Come alone. Bring your laptop for verification. He knew she'd come. She was meticulous. She'd follow protocol. Now, let's go to that night. The rain was just starting, a fine mist that beaded on his windshield like cold sweat. He'd told his parents he was at the library. He'd even walked in, waved to his study group, and then slipped out the back fire exit 10 minutes later. A simple misdirection. He parked 3 blocks away from the docks, in the lot of a shuttered factory. He walked the rest of the way, a dark silhouette against the gray evening. In his backpack was a simple toolkit, a heavy, rubber-coated flashlight, zip ties, a roll of duct tape, and 50 pounds of weights from his home gym, sealed in a waterproof bag. He arrived early. Scoped the location. Dock 7 was perfect. Rotting wood, no overhead lights, the deep, swallowing water below whispering against the pilings. It wasn't a place for people anymore. It was a place for endings. At 7:42 p.m., he saw the glow of headlights. Her little sedan pulled into the broken asphalt lot. He watched her get out, pull her green raincoat tight, clutch her laptop bag to her chest. She looked small, purposeful. She was looking for a colleague. He stepped out of the shadows near a rusted shipping container. Evelyn. She jumped, then relaxed slightly, walking toward his voice. Yes? Are you with compliance? It's so dark out here. Necessary, he said, keeping his voice low, neutral. The data leak is more sensitive than you know. Did you bring the primary evidence? She held up her laptop bag. It's all here. The ledger, the server trails, everything. I can't believe Liam Thorne was doing this. It's... She never finished the sentence. The motion was efficient. A practiced swing of the heavy flashlight. It wasn't about rage. It was about physics. Kinetic energy applied to the temporal lobe. There was a sickening, wet thud, entirely unlike the sound effects in movies. It was a deeply organic, final sound. She dropped without a cry. The laptop bag tumbled to the wet ground. Liam stood over her for a moment, listening. The rain. The river. A distant foghorn. No shouts. No running feet. He felt a surge of pure, clean satisfaction. Problem solved. What happened next was just logistics. He zip-tied her wrists and ankles. He wrapped the duct tape around her head, covering her mouth. She was still breathing, shallow and ragged. He attached the weights to her torso with more zip ties. Then, with a calm, steady effort, he rolled her off the edge of the dock. The splash was louder than he'd anticipated, a thick, deep plunk. He watched the bubbles rise in the black water, a frantic cluster that broke the surface and then stopped. The river smoothed over. It was done. He picked up her laptop bag. He wiped down the flashlight and dropped it into the water 100 yards down. He walked back to his car, the mist cooling his face. His heart rate was elevated, but it was the same elevation he felt after a hard-won debate match. It was the physiology of focus, not fear. Back in his pristine bedroom, he performed the digital cleanup. He scrubbed the lthorn_admin logs permanently. He dismantled the proxy server. He transferred the cryptocurrency assets through 3 new blind wallets. Then, he took Evelyn's laptop, removed its hard drive, and pulverized it with a hammer in his garage, collecting every fragment in a plastic bag to be disposed of separately. By 11 p.m., he was showered. He was in his pajamas. He was reviewing physics formulas for his midterm. When his mother knocked on his door to say the police had called, that an intern from his dad's company was missing, he opened the door with a look of appropriate, mild concern. "That's terrible," he said, his voice the perfect blend of shock and distraction. "I hope she's okay. I've got that test tomorrow, though. Can this wait?" He closed the door. He got into bed. And he slept, deeply and without dreams. Because for Liam Thorne, it wasn't a night of horror. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a successful system update. A transaction completed. And he was already on to the next problem to solve. The arrogance wasn't just in thinking he could get away with it. It was in never once questioning if he should. For 5 long months, the case went cold. The river gave up nothing. The rain had washed every dock clean. Evelyn Reed's name faded from the news, replaced by newer tragedies. In the West Hills, life for the Thorne family returned to its perfect, polished normal. Liam graduated with valedictorian honors. His acceptance to MIT was framed in the hallway. The future was a straight, gleaming line. But Detective Mara Cruz couldn't let it go. She'd close her eyes and see 2 things: Evelyn's meticulous spreadsheet of a life, and Liam Thorne's calm, dismissive eyes in the interview room. The disconnect was an itch in her brain she couldn't scratch. She'd run down every false lead. The disgruntled IT employee theory Liam had suggested? A dead end. The idea of an external hacker? Possible, but it didn't fit the clean, insider precision of the digital crime. It felt like style. And the style matched the boy. But feeling isn't evidence. And without evidence, the fortress around Liam Thorne was impenetrable. The break, when it came, was so small, so stupidly simple, that everyone had missed it. It wasn't in the company servers or the river mud. It was in the one place Liam might have considered an extension of himself, his own home. The Thorne house had a state-of-the-art security system. Cameras at every door, motion sensors, the works. During the initial investigation, they'd reviewed the footage from the night of the murder. It showed exactly what Liam said, him returning home at 8:32 p.m., walking calmly into the house, nothing out of place. The system stored footage locally on a hard drive, which they'd examined. Clean. But the system also had a cloud backup feature. A fail-safe. And it didn't just back up video. It backed up audio from the interior motion-activated sensors, a little-known privacy quirk buried in the user agreement. The family's lawyer, Arthur Cade, had provided access to the video files, but the audio archive? That was never requested. It was an oversight. A new, junior forensics tech, bored and methodical, decided to cross-reference everything from that night. He found the cloud backup server and ran an audio signature analysis. Most of it was useless. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant echo of a TV. Then, he found a file tag from the mudroom entrance, timestamped 8:32 and 7 seconds p.m. The video showed Liam entering, hanging his coat. The audio was just the rustle of fabric. But the tech ran a sensitive audio enhancement filter, stripping away the white noise. And underneath the rustle, there it was. 2 seconds of sound. A wet, gritty shush shush shush. And a voice. Liam's voice. Low, relaxed, speaking to no one but himself. A private mutter of pure satisfaction. Just a loose end. The tech brought it to Cruz. She put on the headphones in the silent lab. She listened to it once. Twice. 10 times. Shush shush shush. The sound of wet shoes on the polished marble entryway. Shoes that had been standing in the rainy gravel by the river. Shoes that had just walked away from a murder. And then those 3 words, dripping with a chilling finality. Just a loose end. It wasn't a confession. It was something better. It was a state of mind. It was the cold, transactional core of the entire crime, spoken aloud in a moment of unguarded arrogance. He felt so safe, so utterly untouchable in his own home, that he'd vocalized his triumph. Cruz felt a jolt, like ice water hitting her veins. This was it. The first real crack in the perfect facade. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a whisper of smoke in a sterile room. It proved he was lying about his night. It proved his emotional state was one of cold resolution, not concern. It proved he was a killer. She immediately drafted a warrant for Liam Thorne's arrest. The probable cause was slender, but it was real. The audio clip was a fishhook. It was enough to pull him in, to get him into an interrogation room under the bright lights, to make him answer for that single damning phrase. Across town, Liam Thorne was packing for a pre-freshman summer program at MIT. He folded his sweaters with precision. He believed the transaction was complete. The equation was solved. He had deleted the problem, and the world had moved on. He had no idea that a tiny, forgotten digital ghost had just spoken his name. The shield was cracking. That audio clip was the first thread pulled, and the entire tapestry of Liam's perfect lie was about to unravel. But pulling him into a courtroom was one thing. Making the charges stick against his family's power and his own brilliant, twisted mind? That was a whole different battle. Don't go anywhere, because after the break, we step into the theater of justice where Liam Thorne is about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He's going to decide to defend himself. The arrest was quiet. No dramatic sirens. No struggling. Just a knock on the door early one morning. Arthur Cade was there in 20 minutes, and Liam was out on bail in under 3 hours. The charge was second-degree murder. The evidence. A wet footprint on audio and a mountain of digital circumstance. For the public, it was a bombshell. The golden boy arrested. For the Thornes, it was war. And wars are won with narratives, not just facts. So, let me set the scene for you. The trial of Liam Thorne. The courtroom was a stage, and everyone had a role. On one side, the prosecution, State's Attorney Angela Rossi, a woman with a reputation for being quiet, methodical, and relentless. She didn't do grand speeches. She built walls, brick by brick. On the other side, Arthur Cade, the Thorne family's legal gladiator. Expensive, smooth, and brutal. And in the center, our star. Liam. He'd traded his sweater vest for a perfectly fitted navy suit. He looked older. Serious. He sat perfectly still, his posture not stiff, but poised. Like a chess master waiting for the first move. The gallery was packed. Reporters scribbling. Evelyn's family, hollow-eyed, clinging to each other in the front row. Liam's parents, a fortress of strained dignity behind him. Judge Aaron Blackwell took the bench. He had a face carved from granite and a voice that didn't ask for silence. It commanded it. You knew, just looking at him, that he had zero patience for games. Arthur Cade stood for his opening statement. He didn't walk to the jury box. He approached them like a trusted professor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice warm, reasonable. What you are about to witness is a tragedy compounded by a travesty. A young woman is missing. It is heartbreaking. But in their desperation to solve this heartbreaking case, the police and the prosecution have committed a grievous error. They have confused a coincidence for a conspiracy. He painted a picture of a brilliant, pressure-filled young man on the cusp of his dreams, of an overworked, perhaps emotionally fragile intern who misinterpreted complex data, and then, tragically, likely took her own life in a moment of despair. You will hear about server logs and proxies, Cade said, waving a dismissive hand. Digital ghosts. You will not hear one piece of physical evidence placing Liam Thorne with Evelyn Reed that night. Not one. Because it doesn't exist. Then he turned the story inside out. He made Liam the victim. You will see a young man persecuted not for what he did, but for who he is. For being smart. For being privileged. The police saw a last name and saw a target. They ignored the real possibilities, a random act of violence, a personal crisis no one knew about, because the easy story, the sensational story, was the rich kid. He finished with a sad, sober look. This isn't just about finding justice for Evelyn Reed. It's about preventing a profound injustice for an innocent young man whose only crime is his own potential. It was a masterstroke. He'd framed the entire trial as a class war, a witch hunt. You could see it land on the jurors' faces. A flicker of doubt. Then, Angela Rossi stood. She was smaller, quieter. She didn't approach the jury. She just looked at them. Mr. Cade is right about one thing, she said, her voice clear and firm. This is about potential. Evelyn Reed's potential. A young woman with a brilliant mind, a meticulous eye, and a strong moral compass. Potential that was deleted on October 16th. She didn't talk about conspiracy. She talked about contamination. This case is about what happens when someone believes the rules are beneath them. When they see a human life as a loose end to be trimmed. She let that phrase hang, the one from the audio clip. You will follow a digital trail of greed and arrogance. You will see how Evelyn Reed discovered that trail. And you will hear, in his own voice, the cold satisfaction of a problem solver who believes he has solved his biggest problem, a witness. Her opening was shorter, sharper. It wasn't about painting a picture. It was about planting a seed of a very specific, very chilling idea. That the boy in the nice suit was capable of seeing a human being as a system error. The first few days of testimony were the foundation. The prosecution called the digital forensics experts, who laid out the complex scam in patient, simple terms. They showed the jury flowcharts, the unauthorized data transfers, the fake cryptocurrency ledger. It was overwhelming. Impressive in its complexity. And through it all, Liam watched. He'd occasionally take a note on a legal pad, leaning over to whisper something to Cade. He wasn't scared. He was engaged, critiquing their methodology in his head. The defense's cross-examination was all about sowing reasonable doubt. Couldn't a sophisticated hacker have done this? Isn't it true this legacy key was vulnerable? Is it possible Evelyn Reed misunderstood what she saw? The experts had to concede the technical possibilities. It was possible. Not probable, but possible. That was all Cade needed. But the real show was Liam himself. His demeanor. He didn't glare at the witnesses or look tragically at the jury. He listened. Intently. Sometimes he'd give a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head when the prosecution made a point, as if he were disappointed by their logic. It was a performance of intelligent innocence, and it was terrifyingly effective. Detective Cruz, watching from the back of the room, felt a fresh wave of that old frustration. He was winning. He was turning a murder trial into a debate club, and he was good at it. The arrogant boy from the interview room was now the sympathetic scholar in the courtroom. The shield wasn't just repaired. It was being held up for the jury to admire. And for a moment, it seemed bulletproof. But Angela Rossi was just laying her bricks. And she'd saved the heaviest ones for last. She was waiting for the moment the chess master, convinced he's already won, makes a move he never should have made. She was waiting for Liam Thorne to take the stand. The prosecution's case was a puzzle, and the jury was starting to see the edges of the picture. But it was still fuzzy. They had the why, the financial scam. They had the state of mind, that damning audio clip. But the concrete how, that's what was still missing. Arthur Cade knew this. In his cross-examinations, he kept hammering the same point. Where is the physical connection? No witness saw them together. No forensics link him to the docs. You have a theory. A digital ghost story. Angela Rossi needed to make that ghost solid. And to do that, she called a witness who looked more like he should be fixing your Wi-Fi than testifying in a murder trial. Ben Sanderson, the digital forensics tech from the police lab. Rumpled shirt, nervous energy, but eyes that were calm and certain behind his glasses. Ben wasn't here to talk about motives or personalities. He was here to talk about the corpse. Not Evelyn's body. The river still kept that secret. He was here to talk about the digital cadaver. Mr. Sanderson, Rossi began. Let's talk about Evelyn Reed's smartphone. What can you tell us about its last known activity? Ben adjusted his microphone. The device was a late-model smartphone. Its last cellular network ping was at 7:41 p.m. on October 16th, near the grid of towers that serviced the industrial dock area. After that, it went silent. Did it simply lose power? Or was it turned off? Based on the network handoff signals, it was actively communicating until the moment it stopped. The cessation was abrupt, consistent with the device being destroyed, or having its signal deliberately blocked. Cade objected. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Blackwell rumbled. Rossi nodded. Let's move to the device itself. Was it ever recovered? No, ma'am. So, it's gone. But in your work, when a device is missing, do you look for other indicators of its fate? Yes. We look for digital echoes. Ben turned to the jury, trying to make it simple. Think of it like, if I delete an email from my computer, the email is gone from my inbox. But the server that sent it might still have a log that says, hey, I sent Ben an email at this exact time. The action leaves a trace somewhere else. Rossi brought up a large display screen. Can you show us what you mean? What followed was a digital autopsy. Ben walked the jury through a simplified schematic. He showed Evelyn's phone, connected to the Thorne biotech server earlier that day as she did her work. He showed the lthorne_admin key accessing the same server. Then, he introduced a new player. A small, anonymous cloud server in another country. A proxy. At 8:17 p.m. on October 16th, Ben said, his finger pointing to a timestamp on the screen, this proxy server received a command. A remote, device wipe command. A factory reset. The target device was Evelyn Reed's smartphone, identified by its unique digital signature. A murmur went through the courtroom. A remote wipe. Someone had tried to burn the digital body. And where did this command originate from? Rossi asked. Ben clicked to the next screen. It was a complex map of data pathways, but he focused on one glowing line. We traced the command back through its encrypted pathway. It was issued from a specific IP address, a unique identifier for a device on the Internet. That IP address was registered to a residential Internet account. And whose account was that? Ben looked directly at Liam. The account was held in the name of Robert and Sylvia Thorne, at their home address in the West Hills. The air was sucked out of the room. Liam's father closed his eyes. His mother stiffened. Cade was on his feet. Objection. This is a shell game. That IP address is for a household Wi-Fi network. Anyone in that house, any guest, any device that was hacked and connected to that network, could have sent that command. Judge Blackwell nodded. The jury will consider the source as the Thorne residence, not the defendant personally. But Rossi wasn't done. Of course, Mr. Cade. Let's talk about which device on that network. She turned back to Ben. In your forensic review, did you isolate which physical machine in the Thorne home sent the command? We did. Through a combination of router logs and device signatures, we were able to identify the specific laptop that initiated the connection to the proxy server at that exact time. Ben pulled up a final screen. It was a list of devices: Smart TV, Sylvia's iPad, Robert's desktop, Liam's laptop. One line was highlighted: Liam's laptop. Timestamp: 8:16 and 58 seconds p.m. Connection initiated to proxy server address. The remote wipe command, Ben said quietly, was issued from Liam Thorne's personal laptop. For the first time, Liam's perfect poise broke. Not dramatically. It was a micro-expression. A tiny, rapid blink. A slight tightening at the corner of his mouth. He looked down at the table in front of him, his mind visibly racing, recalculating. Cade launched into a furious cross-examination. This device signature, it's just a MAC address, correct? A string of numbers that can be spoofed by a hacker. It's possible, but highly, Ben tried to answer. Possible. Thank you. And these router logs, they only show the laptop was communicating with an external server, not that it was commanding it to wipe a phone, correct? That's an inference. The correlation of the timing and the destination server. Yes or no, Mr. Sanderson? The log does not contain the words, "Wipe Evelyn Reed's phone," does it? Ben sighed. No, it does not. So, a sophisticated hacker, Cade said, turning to the jury with a spread of his hands, could have breached the Thorns' home network, spoofed Liam's laptop identifier, and sent this command to frame him, correct? In the realm of digital forensics, that is possible. Ben had to concede. It is a technical possibility. Cade sat down, looking satisfied. He'd thrown enough sand in the gears. He'd resurrected the ghost of the unknown hacker. But as Ben left the stand, the mood had shifted. Rossi hadn't delivered a smoking gun. She delivered something more modern, a smoking server log. The jury had just seen a map. A map that started with Liam's laptop in his wealthy home and ended, just 1 minute later, with Evelyn Reed's life being erased from her phone as she lay, bound and weighted, in the cold river. The connection was no longer just theoretical. It was routed. It was time-stamped. It was a digital bridge between the privileged boy in the West Hills and the violence on the docks. It was the ghost made flesh. And for the first time, when the jury looked at Liam Thorne, they weren't just seeing a smart kid in a suit. They were seeing the owner of the laptop that issued the kill order. The shield was still there. But now, everyone in the room could hear it creaking under the weight of a single, undeniable fact. He was there. In the data. At the moment of the cover-up. And Angela Rossi knew, as she gathered her notes, that Liam Thorne knew it, too. The calm, intellectual distance was crumbling. And a cornered animal, no matter how brilliant, starts to think with its instincts, not its intellect. She was counting on it. There's a rule in lawyering, a fundamental one. Never ask a question you don't know the answer to. There's another, just as important. Never put your client on the stand unless you have absolutely no other choice. The witness box is a minefield. And smart, arrogant clients are the most likely to step on the pressure plate. Arthur Cade knew this. He'd begged Liam in hushed, urgent tones during every recess. The state hasn't met its burden. The digital evidence is circumstantial. Your demeanor is perfect. Let it lie. Do not give them a target. Liam listened, and then he dismissed it. He saw the worry on the jurors' faces after the laptop evidence. He saw the flicker of doubt that his father's money and his own poise couldn't quite erase. To him, this wasn't a danger. It was an insult. A flawed equation needed correction. A misunderstanding needed to be clarified. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that he was the smartest person in the room. And he was going to prove it. The defense calls Liam Thorne to the stand. The words sent an electric jolt through the courtroom. Evelyn's family leaned forward, their faces etched with a new kind of pain, having to look directly at the person they believed took their daughter. Reporters stopped chewing their gum. Judge Blackwell's eyebrows lifted a millimeter. Liam stood. He didn't look at his ashen-faced parents or his tense lawyer. He walked to the witness stand with the calm assurance of a guest lecturer approaching a podium. He took the oath, his voice clear and firm. He sat, adjusted his cufflinks, and turned a polite, expectant gaze to his own attorney. Cade's direct examination was a masterpiece of careful steering. He walked Liam through his impeccable biography, the grades, the awards, the community service. He painted the portrait of the all-American boy. Liam's answers were modest, respectful, and perfectly pitched. Then, Cade approached the knight. Gently. Liam, did you have anything to do with the disappearance of Evelyn Reed? No, sir. I did not. Did you send her any messages, meet with her, or have any contact with her after she left work that day? No, sir. The audio clip from your home. Just a loose end. What did you mean by that? Liam offered a small, self-deprecating smile. I was stressed. I'd just gotten home. I had that physics midterm looming, and a problem set that was a loose end. I was talking to myself about homework. It's a bad habit. I had no idea a woman was missing. The idea that those words could be twisted to mean something so horrible. It's devastating. It was smooth. Believable. He sounded like a kid burdened by the weight of his own success. Cade then let Liam explain the digital evidence his way. And this is where Liam began to shine. He didn't deny the complexity of the scam. He complimented it. The architecture of the scheme you've described is actually quite elegant, he said, turning slightly to include the jury. The use of a proxy server to mask the data scrubbing? That's advanced. The way it leveraged our own biometric datasets to add credibility to a synthetic asset? Frankly, it's something I'd expect from a seasoned Silicon Valley fraudster, not a high school student. I can see why Ms. Reed was intrigued, and why someone capable of that would also be capable of covering their tracks far more thoroughly than I apparently did with my own laptop. He was doing it again. He was reframing. He wasn't saying, I didn't do it. He was saying, the person who did this is a genius, and I'm just a kid with a busy schedule. He was using flattery for a phantom criminal to make himself look small by comparison. He was winning. You could feel it. The jury was listening, some even nodding along as he dissected the scam with clear, intelligent language. He made the prosecution's own evidence sound like a compliment to some unknown mastermind. After an hour, Cade sat down. He looked relieved. Liam had been perfect. Then, Angela Rossi stood up. She didn't approach the podium with a stack of papers. She didn't put on glasses. She just walked slowly to a spot in the well of the courtroom, about 15 feet from Liam, and stood still. She looked at him not as a prosecutor, but as a curious observer. Mr. Thorne, she began, her voice quiet, almost friendly. You're clearly a very intelligent young man. Liam gave a gracious, slight nod. I've been fortunate in my education, yes. And you understand complex systems. Logic. Cause and effect. I try to. So, you'd agree that in any system, the most elegant solution is usually the simplest one? The one with the fewest moving parts. Liam's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. He sensed a trap, but the question seemed too philosophical to be dangerous. Occam's razor, yes. Generally, the simplest explanation is preferable. Rossi smiled. A small, thin smile. Good. Let's talk about systems, then. The dread that had momentarily left the room seeped back in. Arthur Cade stiffened. Liam leaned forward slightly, his intellectual curiosity now fully engaged. He was no longer just defending himself. He was entering a debate. And Angela Rossi had just invited him onto her home turf. The first question was just the opening move. The real game was about to begin, and Liam Thorne, convinced he was still the grandmaster, didn't realize the board had been tilted. Angela Rossi didn't attack. She invited. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice still calm, conversational. This scheme you've called elegant. Help me understand the mindset. What kind of person designs something like this? Liam relaxed into the chair. A theoretical question. A highly logical one. Someone who sees systems, not people. They'd view the company server not as a trusted resource, but as an available tool. The patient's data not as private medical history, but as a useful, high-credibility dataset. It's a profoundly utilitarian mindset. Utilitarian, Rossi repeated, as if considering the word. The greatest good for the greatest number? In a twisted sense, yes. Their own good is the only one that factors in. The needs, the rules, the rights of others are just variables to be managed or eliminated. And this person, Rossi continued, taking a slow step to the side. They discover a lower-level employee, and in turn, has found their work. What's the logical assessment? Liam's eyes flickered, just for an instant, to the jury. He was enjoying this. Explaining the villain's mind was so much more interesting than denying he was in it. The employee is a threat vector, a point of failure. In a secure system, you contain or eliminate points of failure. Eliminate. Rossi let the word hang. Is that a moral decision to this person? Liam gave a slight, dismissive shake of his head. Morality is a social construct. For this mindset, it's a risk-reward calculation. What is the risk of the employee talking? What is the risk of eliminating the problem? Manageable, with planning. The calculation is clear. A few jurors shifted in their seats. The coldness of the analysis was chilling, even as a hypothetical. So they plan, Rossi said. They lure the employee. They neutralize the threat. Then they have a new problem. The physical evidence. The body. What's the logical solution there? Disposal. In a remote location. Using a medium that decomposes and disperses evidence. A body of water is statistically optimal. And the digital evidence? The employee's phone, her laptop. Immediate remote wipe for the phone. Destruction of the hardware for the laptop. You'd want to sever all digital threads between the threat and yourself. Rossi stopped walking. She was now directly between Liam and the jury. And after all that? After the planning, the execution, the cleanup, how does this person feel? Liam paused. For the first time, a tiny crack of caution appeared. This was edging out of theory and toward something personal. But his arrogance, his need to display his understanding, overrode it. They'd feel efficient, satisfied with their own competence. The emotion isn't guilt or horror. It's the satisfaction of a complex problem solved correctly. A job well done, Rossi said softly. Exactly. The courtroom was utterly silent. Liam had just described, in cool, precise detail, every single step of Evelyn Reed's murder and its cover-up. He'd given the jury the why behind every how. And he'd done it while sitting in the witness chair. Rossi let the silence stretch. Let the portrait he'd painted dry on the air. Then, she tilted her head. You've described this person as seeing systems, not people. As being profoundly utilitarian. In psychology, we have terms for that. Sociopathic traits. A lack of empathy. Would you agree? Arthur Cade was half out of his seat. Objection. The witness is not a psychologist. Sustained, Judge Blackwell said, but his eyes were fixed on Liam. Rossi backtracked smoothly. Of course. Let's talk about evidence, then. The evidence you, yourself, have just outlined. She turned and pointed to the large screen, still displaying the schematic of the digital evidence. The server breach. The lure. The remote wipe from your laptop. The disposal by the river. This utilitarian blueprint. Does it fit the known facts of this case? Liam's confidence wavered. He saw the trap now, but it was too late. He was inside it. It fits a set of facts. As my attorney said, a hacker could have. A hacker, Rossi cut in, her voice finally gaining an edge, who just happens to think exactly like you do, who analyzes problems with the same cold, utilitarian logic you just described, who values efficiency over empathy in a way you seem to understand intimately. I was theorizing. Liam's voice tightened, a hint of frustration seeping through. Were you? Rossi took a step closer. Or were you explaining? She didn't wait for an answer. She picked up a glass of water from her table, took a slow sip, and changed direction entirely. Mr. Thorne, you've said you were home studying after 8:30 p.m. But the state's evidence shows your laptop initiating that remote wipe command at 8:17 p.m. Can you explain that? Back on solid, denial ground, Liam regrouped. I can't explain what a hacker did with my machine's identity. My laptop was in my backpack. I was in my room. The network was not secure. A hacker, Rossi repeated. She walked back to her table and picked up a single sheet of paper. A hacker who, according to you, was a sophisticated, elegant genius. Yet this genius chose to frame you by using your home Wi-Fi network, one of the most secure, private networks available, instead of a public cafe or a spoofed mobile connection. That's an incredibly risky, illogical move for our elegant utilitarian, isn't it? Why take the chance? Liam opened his mouth, then closed it. His mind raced, searching for the elegant counter. None came. I don't know why a criminal does what they do. But you seemed to know a moment ago, Rossi pressed, her voice dropping to a whisper the whole room strained to hear. You understood the logic perfectly. Until it pointed back to you. Then it becomes a mystery. She let that hang. Then she delivered the final, simple blow. When you got home that night, your shoes were wet. You muttered about a loose end. The state contends you were referring to Evelyn Reed. You say it was about physics. A loose end. She paused, looking him directly in the eye. Which was it, Liam? A human being? Or a homework problem? The question wasn't about evidence. It was about identity. It forced him to choose, in front of everyone, which Liam Thorne was real, the empathetic student, or the cold logician he just so vividly described. He froze. The mask of intellectual detachment crumbled into sheer, paralyzed panic. He looked to his lawyer, to his parents, to the judge. His mouth was a dry line. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. Then he couldn't answer, because any answer condemned him. Finally, he croaked, I want to clarify my earlier statement. But Angela Rossi just turned away. No further questions, Your Honor. As she walked back to her seat, she didn't look triumphant. She looked like a surgeon who had just completed a delicate, necessary operation. The damage wasn't in a confession. It was in the demonstration. For over an hour, the jury hadn't been watching a defendant deny a crime. They'd been watching a brilliant, cold mind dissect its own motivations. They'd seen him find perfect sense in the senseless. They'd seen him relate to the killer more easily than he related to the victim. And in that final, terrible silence, they heard the answer he couldn't give. Arthur Cade's redirect was a desperate, stumbling mess. Liam's answers were now hesitant, over-explained, his confidence shattered. The performance was over. The catalyst had done its work. As Liam stepped down from the witness stand, his legs seemed less steady. He didn't look at the jury. He kept his eyes on the floor, a boy who had finally, truly seen the trap, and realized he'd built every inch of it himself. The arrogant monster had just explained his own nature to the world. And the world was finally listening. The walk from the witness stand back to the defense table is about 20 feet. For Liam Thorne, it must have felt like a mile. The confident stride was gone. His shoulders were slightly hunched, as if against a cold wind only he could feel. He didn't look at the jury, at his parents, at the triumphant, grim faces of Evelyn's family. He stared at the polished wood floor, his mind visibly reeling, trying to process how his masterpiece of testimony had collapsed into a confession of character. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rustle of a juror's sleeve, the soft click of the court reporter's keys. The air was thick with the aftermath of Angela Rossi's surgical strike. Judge Aaron Blackwell looked down at his notes, then at the clock. It was just after 3 p.m. He cleared his throat, a sound like stone grinding against stone. Mr. Thorne. Counsel. His eyes moved between Liam and the lawyers. My chambers. Now. He didn't ask. He didn't suggest a recess. He issued a command. Then he stood and left the bench, his black robe sweeping behind him. For a second, no one moved. This was highly unusual. Judges don't typically call defendants into chambers during trial unless something is very, very wrong. Arthur Cade looked pale. He placed a hand on Liam's arm, guiding him up. Liam moved like a sleepwalker. Angela Rossi gathered a notepad, her face unreadable. The three of them, Liam, Cade, and Rossi, filed through the side door and into the private hallway that led to the judge's chambers. Let me paint this room for you. It wasn't what you see on TV. It was small, dominated by a massive, scarred oak desk piled with law books and binders. The walls were lined with more bookshelves. A single window looked out onto the gray Portland sky. It smelled of old paper, lemonwood polish, and quiet, immense power. Judge Blackwell was already seated behind his desk. He didn't offer them seats. He steepled his fingers and looked at Liam, who stood between the two attorneys like a student summoned to the principal's office. Mr. Thorne, the judge began, his voice lower, more intimate than in the courtroom, but somehow even more terrifying. I have been on this bench for 18 years. I have presided over drug murders, gang executions, crimes of passion that would turn your stomach. I have seen every kind of liar, every kind of performance. He leaned forward slightly. What I have just witnessed from you on the stand is one of the most disturbing displays I have ever seen in my courtroom. And not for the reason you think. Liam opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Cade jumped in. Your Honor, the prosecution's line of questioning was highly prejudicial, designed to provoke. I'm not talking about the questions, Mr. Cade, Blackwell interrupted, his gaze never leaving Liam. I'm talking about the answers. I'm talking about the effect. He picked up a pen, tapping it lightly on his desk. Throughout this trial, you have displayed a profound disconnect. During the victim impact statements, you showed no emotion. Not anger, not sympathy, not discomfort. You were analyzing. When technical evidence was presented, you were engaged, alert, almost appreciative of its complexity. On the stand, when describing the hypothetical motives and methods of a killer, you were articulate, insightful, and completely detached from the horror of those acts. He paused, letting the assessment sink into the silent, book-lined room. What you displayed, Mr. Thorne, was not the demeanor of a wrongfully accused young man. It was the clinical profile of someone with a profound antisocial orientation, a lack of empathetic resonance. You understand the logic of human emotion only as a system to be manipulated. You understand guilt only as a legal variable, not a moral weight. Liam found his voice, but it was thin, reedy. You're diagnosing me? Based on how I sit in a chair. I'm observing you, Blackwell corrected, his voice icy. As is the jury. And I am advising you right now, as an officer of this court, that your performance is not helping you. It is etching a picture for 12 people that no closing argument from your attorney will be able to erase. He turned his flinty eyes to Cade. Your client's intelligence is not in question. His humanity is. And he is testifying against himself with every measured, emotionless reaction. You need to make him understand that before he speaks another word in my courtroom. It was a warning shot across the bow of the entire defense strategy. The judge wasn't accusing Liam of the murder in here. He was accusing him of being exactly what Angela Rossi had implied, a sociopath. And in a murder trial, that's often all a jury needs to know. Liam's face flushed with a heat that was part shame, part fury. The arrogance, wounded and cornered, flared. So I'm supposed to cry? To put on a show? Isn't that what a guilty person would do? I'm being authentic. Judge Blackwell's expression didn't change. Authenticity, Mr. Thorne, is what you just gave the jury. And it chilled them to the bone. You can't perform humanity if you don't have access to the script. They can see that. The bluntness was devastating. Liam looked as if he'd been physically struck. His concept of himself, the brilliant strategist, the superior intellect, was useless here. The judge wasn't arguing facts. He was stating a visceral, psychological truth that Liam could not logic his way around. "The sentencing hearing is tomorrow," Judge Blackwell said, closing the subject. He looked at Angela Rossi. "The state will have its recommendation. The defense will have its plea for leniency. And Mr. Thorne will have the right to allocution, to speak on his own behalf before I pass sentence." His gaze returned to Liam, final and heavy. "Think very, very carefully about what you choose to say. The words you use today painted a picture of a killer's mind. The words you use tomorrow will determine whether you spend the next 60 years in a cage. You are dismissed." The meeting was over. Back in the hallway, the three of them stood for a moment in stunned silence. Arthur Cade looked exhausted, defeated. Angela Rossi simply walked away, the ghost of a satisfied curve on her lips. Liam stood there, in the fluorescent-lit institutional hallway, the judge's assessment ringing in his ears. A profound antisocial orientation. A lack of empathetic resonance. They were just words. Psychological terms. But they had, in 5 minutes, dismantled the last pillar of his defense, his character. He could no longer be the wronged golden boy. The judge had officially recast him, in the privacy of his chambers, as the arrogant monster. And the terrible, clarifying truth finally dawned on Liam Thorne. This wasn't a debate he could win with a better argument. This was a judgment he was going to lose because of who he was. The reckoning wasn't coming tomorrow. It had already happened. In that quiet, book-lined room, his fate had been sealed. All that was left was the sentencing. The courtroom on the morning of the sentencing felt different. The trial was over. The verdict was in. The theater had closed, and now this room was just a machine for delivering consequences. The air was heavier. The light seemed too bright, exposing every pale face and red-rimmed eye. Liam Thorne sat at the defense table, wearing another perfect suit. But the performance was gone. His posture was rigid, not poised. His eyes were fixed on a single knot in the wood of the table before him. He wasn't analyzing the room anymore. He was waiting for the axe to fall. His parents were not in the front row today. His father's seat was empty. His mother sat several rows back, a veil over her face, as if she were at a funeral for someone she didn't know very well. In a way, she was. The first part of the hearing was a formality. Judge Blackwell entered. The guilty verdict was formally entered into the record. A dry, legal ticking of a box. Then, Angela Rossi stood. The state calls Marla Reed to the stand. Evelyn's mother walked to the witness box. She was a small woman, diminished by grief, clutching a crumpled tissue. She didn't look at Liam. She looked at the judge, and then at a spot on the wall, as if she could see her daughter there. When she began to speak, her voice was a thin, frayed wire. "Evelyn. She was my best friend. Not just my daughter. She was the steady one. When her father died, she was 14. She made the coffee. She balanced my checkbook." A broken, wet sound that was almost a laugh. "She was 22, and she'd call me to remind me to get my tires rotated." She spoke about empty chairs at holidays. About the silence in what used to be a noisy apartment. About how she couldn't bring herself to delete Evelyn's number from her phone, because then she'd have to admit she was never going to call it again. "He didn't just take my daughter," she whispered, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge. "He took the mother of the children she'd never have. He took the wife from a man she'd never meet. He took the cures she might have helped discover in her work. He took my future. And he talks about it like it was a math problem." She finally turned her head, just slightly, toward Liam. "You are a vampire. You feed on futures because you have no soul of your own to build one with." She stepped down, her legs buckling slightly. A victim's advocate caught her arm and guided her back to her seat, where her son, Evelyn's younger brother, put his arm around her. He was next. He was 18, the same age as Liam. He talked about how his sister had taught him to drive. How she'd helped him with his college essays. "She was my GPS," he said, his voice cracking. "And now I'm just lost. And the guy who did it is right there. He gets to keep breathing. He gets to see the sky. It's not right. It will never be right." One by one, they painted a portrait of a life, not a victim, but a person. Full of quirks and kindness and quiet brilliance. A person who made the world around her objectively better. And through it all, Liam Thorne did not move. He didn't cry. He didn't wince. He didn't hang his head in shame. He breathed slowly, in and out, his eyes still on that knot in the wood. His only reaction was a single, slow blink when Evelyn's brother called him a vampire. It wasn't a flinch of guilt. It was the blink of someone hearing a weak, overly emotional argument. He was still calculating, still assessing the performance of their grief. He couldn't connect to it. He could only critique it. When the family was finished, the room was soaked in a raw, audible pain. Even a few jurors were wiping their eyes. Judge Blackwell's expression was grim, etched with a deep, weary understanding of the human cost laid before him. Angela Rossi stood for her final recommendation. She didn't need to be dramatic. The family had done all the work. "Your Honor, Liam Thorne represents a unique and permanent danger to society. He is not a product of poverty, of abuse, of desperation. He is a product of privilege and a profound moral void. He killed not in passion, but in cool, transactional efficiency. He has shown zero remorse, because in his worldview, he did nothing wrong. He simply removed an obstacle." She paused, looking directly at Liam. "He will do it again. The next time his goals are threatened. The next time someone becomes a loose end. The only way to protect society from Liam Thorne is to permanently remove his ability to harm it. The state recommends the maximum sentence permissible under the law for a defendant tried as an adult: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The words landed in the silent room with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Arthur Cade stood next, his voice hoarse. He talked about Liam's youth, his potential for rehabilitation, his isolated act. It sounded hollow, a whisper against a hurricane of grief. He asked for a term of years, for a chance at mercy. Judge Blackwell listened, giving no indication of his thoughts. Then, he turned his gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Thorne, you have the right to make a statement to the court before sentence is passed. This is known as allocution. Do you wish to speak?" Every eye in the room turned to Liam. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, desperately. "No." "Liam, for God's sake, just say, 'No, thank you, Your Honor.' Let it be. Don't say a word." Liam listened to the whisper. He looked at his lawyer's panicked face. He looked at the judge. He looked at the family, their faces twisted with hatred and hurt. And in that moment, the arrogance, wounded, cornered, but far from dead, reared up one last time. He couldn't let them have the last word. He couldn't let this emotional, illogical spectacle be the final testimony on who he was. He gently pushed his lawyer's hand away from his arm. He stood up. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and firm in the hushed room. "I do." He stood. He smoothed the front of his suit jacket. He took a slow breath, not of fear, but of preparation. This was his final argument. His closing statement to the world. He didn't face the judge. He turned, slightly, to address the room, the jury, the gallery, the grieving reeds. He wore an expression of pained patience, like a scientist forced to explain basic principles to a stubborn child. "For over a year," he began, his voice calm, resonant, carrying perfectly in the still air, "I have been asked to confess to a tragedy I had no part in. I've been told to embody a monster that exists only in your collective imagination." He took a small step forward, his hands coming up, open, in a gesture of reason. "You wanted a story. A simple story. The privileged predator. The careless rich kid who snuffs out a life for fun or profit. It's a satisfying narrative. It fits neatly into a headline. But the world isn't neat." He shook his head, a teacher disappointed with his class's poor performance. "What you've built this conviction on is a house of digital cards. Coincidences stacked into a theory. A theory you now treat as fact. You heard a phrase about a loose end, and you molded it to fit your monster. You saw a complex financial anomaly and, lacking the expertise to find its true architect, you pinned it on the nearest convenient genius. A few jurors' eyes widened. Convenient genius. He just called himself a genius, in open court. My condolences to the Reed family are real, he said, his tone dipping into something meant to sound sorrowful, but which landed as condescending. To lose a child is an unimaginable pain. But your tragedy isn't my fault. You're directing your grief at a shadow. You're chasing a ghost, and you've shackled a future instead. He gestured to himself, a summation of his own value. You have, in your desperation, chosen to extinguish a life of tangible, proven potential. A mind capable of contributing to fields that matter, medicine, physics, systems logic, over a story about a mind you imagined was capable of evil. You are valuing a phantom over a reality. Arthur Cade had his head in his hands. Evelyn's brother made a choked sound, like a sob of pure fury. Liam ignored them. He was in the flow now. The prosecution spoke of my lack of emotion, he continued, a hint of intellectual scorn entering his voice. They pathologize my clarity. They mistake calm for coldness, logic for malice. In a room charged with hysteria, a steady voice sounds like a threat. I am not a threat. I am a casualty. A casualty of your need for a villain simple enough for you to understand. He finally turned to face Judge Blackwell, but his words were for everyone. You have the legal authority to lock me away, to take the decades of work I've done, the achievements I've earned, and bury them in a concrete box. You can do that. But ask yourself, when you do that, are you serving justice? Or are you just completing the final act of your own satisfying story? Are you protecting society from a monster? Or are you punishing a young man because his mind works in a way that makes you uncomfortable? He paused, letting the accusation hang. He had flipped the script entirely. He wasn't the killer. He was the misunderstood visionary, being persecuted for his own intelligence. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left the room gasping. He took one last look around, his gaze lingering on the jury with something close to pity. You wanted a monster, he said, his voice dropping to a devastating, confident finish. But all you found was a straight-A student from a good family. I hope, in time, you can forgive yourselves for the difference. He sat down. The silence was absolute. It wasn't the silence of respect or of awe. It was the silence of a roomful of people who had just witnessed something truly, profoundly obscene. He had looked into the raw, bleeding wound of a family's agony and called it a fantasy. He had taken their dead daughter and labeled her a phantom. Evelyn's mother was trembling, her face white with a rage beyond tears. A juror put a hand over her mouth. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, staring at her machine in disbelief. Judge Aaron Blackwell had listened without moving a muscle. His flinty eyes had tracked Liam's every word, every subtle gesture of contempt. He watched Liam take his seat, adjust his cuff, and look forward with an expression of serene vindication. Then, Judge Blackwell slowly closed the folder in front of him. He laid his pen down precisely, parallel to the edge of the desk. He looked at Liam, and then at Arthur Cade, whose face was a mask of professional ruin. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, deceptively calm. It cut through the thick, horrified silence like a razor. Mr. Thorne, counsel, my chambers. Now. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words were not an invitation. They were a verdict all their own. He stood, his black robe swirling, and left the bench without another glance. The reckoning had been scheduled for tomorrow. But Liam Thorne's speech had just made it immediate. This time, there was no hallway, no pause. Judge Blackwell led them directly from the bench into his chambers and closed the door. The air in the small room was charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. He did not sit. He stood behind his desk, his hands flat on the wood, his shoulders set. He looked at Liam, who still wore the faint, defiant afterglow of his speech. That, Judge Blackwell said, his voice low and dangerous, was the most disgraceful display I have ever seen at a sentencing. You were not allocated time for a final act of character assassination against the victim and her family. You were given a chance to show a shred of human remorse. Instead, you gave a lecture. Liam's defiance hardened. I spoke the truth. This is a miscarriage. Be silent, the judge cut in, the command absolute. He turned his gaze to Arthur Cade. Your client's statement will be entered into the record, and it will be the cornerstone of my sentencing rationale. He has just provided a masterclass in why he is a permanent danger to this society. He picked up a single sheet of paper, the sentencing order. We are going back into that courtroom. I am going to pass sentence. And you, Mr. Thorne, are going to sit there and listen. You will not speak. You will not gesture. You will bear witness to the consequence of the person you have chosen to be. Do you understand? Liam said nothing, his jaw clenched. Cade nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor. Minutes later, they were back. The gallery, sensing the end, was a held breath. Liam sat, his earlier serenity gone, replaced by a watchful, trapped tension. Judge Blackwell took the bench. He put on his reading glasses, but he didn't look at the paper. He looked at Liam. Liam Thorne, please stand. Liam stood. His hands, for the first time, were not still. They flexed once at his sides. The duty of this court is not to punish potential, Judge Blackwell began, his voice clear and carrying to every corner. It is to assess action and character, and to protect the community from future harm. You have consistently conflated your intellectual ability with moral immunity. You believe your mind elevates you above the rules that govern human interaction. You are wrong. He leaned forward. Your speech today was not the defense of an innocent man. It was the manifesto of a narcissist. You called a murdered woman a phantom. You called her grieving family's pain a satisfying story. You diagnosed the court's quest for justice as hysteria. In your profound arrogance, you believe that by redefining the language, you can redefine the crime. You cannot. Liam flinched, as if each word were a physical blow. You are not being punished for being intelligent, the judge continued, his tone scalpel sharp. You are being punished for being morally vacant. You see human beings as variables. Life as a transaction. The law does not deal in transactions. It deals in rights. And Evelyn Reed had a right to live that you arrogated to yourself to revoke. He picked up the sentencing order. You have shown zero capacity for rehabilitation because you see no need for it. You feel no remorse because you feel no wrong. Therefore, the only just sentence is one that permanently removes your ability to pose this threat again. He took a final breath, his eyes locking on Liam's. It is the judgment of this court that you, Liam Thorne, be committed to the custody of the Department of Corrections for the remainder of your natural life, without the possibility of parole. The gavel fell. Crack. The sound was stunningly loud. Final. For a second, nothing happened. Then, Liam's head jerked back slightly, as if the words were a physical force he hadn't calculated. His eyes widened, scanning the room, the judge, his lawyer, his mother weeping silently, not with understanding, but with a frantic algorithmic confusion. The equation had spit out an error. Life. Natural life. No parole. This was not a variable he could manage. It was the wall at the end of the universe. A bailiff stepped forward, metal glinting in his hand. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around Liam's wrists was a tiny, precise echo of the gavel. The touch of the cold metal broke the spell. "Wait," Liam whispered, his voice stripped of all its polished confidence, thin and young. "No, you don't understand. There's been a logical error." The bailiff took his arm. He took a step, stumbled, his legs refusing the new programming of a convict. The arrogant posture was gone, collapsed into the slack disbelief of a child who has just been told a terrible, irreversible truth. He looked over his shoulder as he was led toward the side door, his eyes wild, seeking his lawyer, his mother, the judge, any authority figure who could correct this mistake. but their faces were turned away, or closed to him. The system he had mocked had finished its computation. The door to the holding cell area opened, a rectangle of harsh fluorescent light. He paused on the threshold, a final, fleeting silhouette of the boy in the sweater vest. Then he was pulled through. The door shut with a heavy, hydraulic sigh. In the silent courtroom, the only sound was the muffled, receding echo of a single shattered word. Error. But there was no error. Only consequence. The transaction, at long last, was complete. 6 months later, the rain in Portland hadn't changed. It was the same fine, cold mist, smelling of wet earth and pine. Detective Mara Cruz stood on the same abandoned dock, Dock 7, her hands buried in her coat pockets. The river slid by, dark and indifferent, keeping its secrets. There was no closure to find here. No magical piece of evidence washed up on shore. But she came anyway. For Evelyn. The case was closed. The file was archived. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the removal of a tumor. Necessary, grim, leaving a hollow space where the poison used to be. She thought about Liam Thorne's final speech, the breathtaking arrogance of it. He'd been so sure his logic was a force field. He never understood that the courtroom wasn't a debate hall. It was a mirror. And in the end, it showed him back to the world exactly as he was. Not a genius, but a brilliant, empty room. Her phone buzzed. A message from a contact in the Department of Corrections, following up on a query she'd made. She'd asked, unofficially, how he was adapting. The reply was short. Incarcerated individual Thorne is housed in the maximum security wing at Stonehaven. He spends most of his time in the law library. Has filed 3 appeals pro se, all dismissed. Refuses group therapy. Tells other inmates they're wasting their time with emotionalism. He is not popular. Cruz almost smiled. No. He wouldn't be. 200 miles away, behind 30-foot walls of reinforced concrete, Liam Thorne sat in a different kind of library. The air smelled of old paper, industrial cleaner, and the faint, ever-present tang of human confinement. He was at a small metal desk, a stack of legal manuals before him, his fingers tracing lines of text. He was drafting another appeal, this one focusing on the prejudicial nature of judicial commentary in chambers. His world was now 9 feet by 12. A concrete cube. The only systems to master were the routines of the prison, the count times, the meal schedules, the intricate, brutal social hierarchy he refused to acknowledge. He'd tried, at first, to apply his old logic, to debate the guards on policy, to explain to his cellmate, a man named Vasquez who was in for armed robbery, the economic inefficiencies of crime. Vasquez had listened for 2 minutes before saying, "You talk like a robot, kid. Shut up before someone shuts you up for good." His intellect, his greatest weapon, was worthless here. It was a pebble thrown into a deep, dark well. It didn't even make a splash. At night, lying on his thin bunk, he would hear the echoes of the prison, a symphony of clanging metal, distant shouts, the low hum of vast, indifferent machinery. He would run the equations of his life over and over, searching for the miscalculation, the point of failure. He always arrived at the same conclusion. There wasn't one. The world had simply been illogical. It had valued the wrong things. It was a flaw in the external system, not in him. But in the silent, private dark, a colder thought sometimes whispered. What if the system wasn't flawed? What if he was? What if the emptiness he'd always felt wasn't the clarity of a superior mind, but just emptiness? He shoved the thought away. It was a virus, an error in his own code. He focused on the law books, on the angles, the procedures. There had to be a way to appeal the world itself. Back in Portland, Cruz left the dock. She got in her car, the heater blasting against the damp chill. On her passenger seat was a manila folder. On top was a photocopy of Liam Thorne's senior yearbook page, sent over by the school during the investigation. There he was. The clean-cut, smiling face. The caption beneath read, "Liam Thorne, most likely to succeed." She stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened the folder and placed it on top of the final document inside, His Department of Corrections intake photo. The mugshot. Pale, hollow-eyed, with a number placard held under his chin. Most likely to succeed. She closed the folder, started the car, and drove away from the whispering river, leaving the ghost of a future that had been traded, coldly and logically, for a concrete forever. So, what do we make of Liam Thorne? This wasn't a story about a detective outsmarting a criminal. It was about a criminal outsmarting himself. His fatal flaw wasn't the murder. Plenty of murders go unsolved. His flaw was his belief that the rules of human emotion, of morality, of simple decency, were beneath him. He thought he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. But the courtroom and life isn't either game. It's a mirror. And in the end, he was judged most harshly by the reflection he himself created. He was given every advantage, a brilliant mind, every resource, a future paved in gold. And he traded it all for, what? The thrill of a secret scam? The satisfaction of deleting a problem? In his final arrogant speech, he begged the court to see his potential. And the court looked back at him and saw, clearly, what that potential was for. More calculation, more manipulation, more cold deletion of anyone who became inconvenient. Justice, in this case, wasn't about finding a body or a murder weapon. It was about recognizing a poison in the system and permanently quarantining it. The cell isn't just a punishment for Liam Thorne, it's a containment unit for a worldview. A worldview where people are assets or liabilities, and liabilities get removed. His life sentence wasn't just for taking a life. It was for proving, beyond any doubt, that he would never understand why that was wrong. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What was his true fatal flaw? Was it the greed that started the scam? The violence that covered it up? Or was it the moment in that silent courtroom, when he looked at a grieving family and saw not human beings, but an audience for his final perfect performance? I'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and tell me, in a story of arrogance, what's the most damning mistake a person like Liam can make? And if this deep dive into a twisted mind held your attention, I've got more stories like this waiting for you. Tales of ambition gone wrong, of secrets that refuse to stay buried, and of the moment overconfidence becomes a cage. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for listening. Until next time.